I remember the way the air felt that day. It was heavy, thick with the weight of something no one could quite name, but we all felt it. War had been raging for months between our kingdom and the one across the river. The battles had taken many lives. Everyone was tired, angry, and ready to fight for what we believed was right. But something happened that none of us expected. It started with the princess. Princess Sina was not like the other royals. While most stayed in the safety of the palace, far from the warfront, Sina was different. She had always been curious, always wanting to understand more than just what she was told. As a child, she would sneak out of the palace to speak with the villagers, to see the world beyond the tall walls. And even when the war broke out, she never seemed afraid. She would stand on the palace balcony, staring out at the battlefield, her face calm but thoughtful. One day, everything changed. We were losing a key battle at the time, one that would likely determine the outcome of the war. The enemy general, a man named Ito, was known for his cunning and ruthlessness. He had never lost a battle, and our soldiers feared him. His strategies were brilliant, but his reputation was built on fear. The day I speak of was a warm one, not too different from others. The soldiers were returning from yet another clash with Ito's forces, and the tension in the air was thick. That afternoon, something odd happened. Princess Sina disappeared. At first, no one knew where she had gone. The palace guards searched every corner of the grounds, but she was nowhere to be found. Whispers began spreading among the staff and even reached the streets. The princess had left the palace. But why? And where would she go? It was only later that we learned the truth. Princess Sina had crossed the river. That was where she found him, General Ito. Now, I don't know what went through her mind as she approached the enemy's camp. But the story goes that she wasn't afraid. She didn't try to sneak in or hide. She simply walked right into the camp. Ito's soldiers, confused, didn't know what to do with her. After all, this was the princess of the kingdom they were fighting against. But there was something about Sina, her calmness, her poise, that made them hesitate. They led her straight to their general, unsure of what would happen next. And that's where the real story begins. When Sina stood before Ito, something happened that no one expected. Instead of demanding her capture or execution, Ito listened to her. We don't know the exact words she spoke to him that day, but they spent hours in conversation, sitting beneath the shade of a large tree, away from the noise of the war. Some say Sina spoke of peace, of a way to end the bloodshed without more lives being lost. Others believe she appealed to something deeper in Ito, something more personal. What we do know is that the two of them met again after that day. Secretly, of course, Sina would leave the palace at night, disguised as a commoner, and cross the river to meet him. They spoke of many things: life, their kingdoms, the future, and somewhere in those conversations, they began to fall in love. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? A princess and the enemy general, two people who were supposed to hate each other, finding something more than just understanding. But love, I suppose, doesn't follow the rules of kingdoms or wars. They were careful, but secrets like theirs are hard to keep. Soon, rumors spread on both sides. The princess was seen sneaking out at night. The enemy general was leaving camp for unexplained reasons. And eventually, both kingdoms knew what was happening. Our king was furious when he found out. He saw Sina's actions as betrayal, and in some ways, she was, after all, meeting with the man who had killed many of our people, who led the army that threatened our kingdom. But to her, Ito wasn't just an enemy. He was someone who understood her, someone who wanted the same things she did, which is peace. The enemy king was no different. When he learned of the meetings, he threatened Ito with disgrace and punishment. He couldn't understand how his most trusted general could betray him like this. For a while, it seemed like their love might cost them everything. The war continued, fiercer than ever, and both kingdoms pushed harder to win. But Sina and Ito knew they had to make a choice. They couldn't keep meeting in secret forever. They either had to give up their love for the sake of their people or find a way to stop the war themselves. And so, one night, they made a decision. Sina and Ito met under the same tree where they had first spoken, the moonlight casting soft shadows across the riverbank. They knew that if they returned to their people as enemies, the war would never end. So they made a plan, one that would bring them together, but also force their kingdoms to confront the truth. The next morning, the two of them returned, not as enemies, but as allies. They walked side by side across the river. To the surprise of both armies, soldiers from both sides watched in shock as the princess of one kingdom and the general of the other stood together, hands clasped, no longer hiding their love. The kings, of course, were outraged. They demanded answers, called them traitors. But Sina and Ito refused to back down. They spoke to their people, not as rulers or generals, but as two individuals who had seen enough suffering. They didn't ask for forgiveness, only for peace. It wasn't easy. There were threats. There were battles still to be fought. But something changed that day. The soldiers, seeing their leaders stand together, began to question the purpose of the war. Why were they fighting? Really? For land? For power? What was worth all this death? It took time, but slowly, the kings began to see it too. Sina and Ito didn't stop the war overnight, but their love planted a seed of change. Conversations began, treaties were discussed, and over the next year, the war came to an end, not because of armies, but because of the courage of two people who dared to believe in something more than just fighting. Sina and Ito's love wasn't the weakness everyone thought it was. In the end, it was the strength that brought peace to both kingdoms. They married, and while not everyone approved at first, the peace that followed was undeniable. I watched all of this unfold, from the whispers in the streets to the day the armies laid down their weapons. And now, when I walk past the river, I still see that tree where they first met, standing tall, its branches strong, just like the love that changed everything. That's the story of Princess Sina and General Ito, the love that ended a war. It's a story I'll never forget.